Hunter Biden guilty verdict. I've got two big takes from it. And I talked some, you might have heard this yesterday on Clay and Buck. I did the show from D.C., but let me hit all of you with this. Number one, a lot of comparison between Hunter Biden's guilty verdict and Trump's guilty verdict. I haven't heard hardly anyone else point this out, which is Hunter Biden was convicted by the best possible jury pool that he could have. That is Wilmington, Delaware City, in the state that his dad has represented for nearly 50 years, in his home state. If you were going to charge Hunter Biden with a crime and Hunter Biden got to pick where he would stand trial for that crime, I think he would probably pick Wilmington, Delaware, yet he was still found guilty there. That's consequential. Best possible jury pool found Hunter Biden guilty. Trump got found guilty by basically the worst possible jury pool for him. Everyone who wants Trump guilty is in New York City, in Manhattan, by and large. He didn't even get Staten Island. For those of you who know New York City, that's where somebody might be voting for Trump in large numbers. And they found him guilty there. But if Trump got to pick where his jury trial would be, I don't think there's any possibility Trump would have been found guilty in West Virginia or Wyoming or Alabama or my home state of Tennessee, where there is many more Trump voters there. I haven't heard very many people talk about this, but I think it's pretty significant. That's point one on the jury pool itself. All juries are not created equal. When I practiced law, for instance, in the United States Virgin Islands, everybody fought as hard as they could to get cases there because the jury was very favorable to plaintiffs. Average juror at that time had an 8th grade education. There's only 100,000 people who live in the U.S. Virgin Islands as citizens. So there was a very good chance that you might know the plaintiff or the plaintiff's family. And there were, as a result, really big verdicts that were regularly given down. Forum shopping is a big deal. There are good jury pools, good forums, bad forums, all of that factoring in. Okay, so that's point one. Point two is far more significant. Now that the Hunter Biden laptop has been introduced as evidence, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Hunter Biden laptop is real and that the contents of the Hunter Biden laptop are real as well. 4 years after many people in the media allowed the idea to be spread by the 51 intelligence agents that this was some sort of Russian disinformation, the Hunter Biden laptop was introduced as evidence by the FBI, was accepted as evidence, and Hunter Biden has been convicted based partly on the evidence from inside of that laptop. It's real. Why does this matter? This is hugely important, and I have talked about it before, but I want all of you to follow me on this discussion because I think it's the most important takeaway now that cannot be disputed associated with Hunter Biden. In October of 2020, the New York Post published a story focused on the corruption of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden based on the evidence from the Hunter Biden laptop. They didn't focus on the hookers. They didn't focus on the crack. They didn't focus on the guns. All of that was readily apparent on the laptop. They focused on Hunter being paid millions of dollars by Ukrainian interest, by Chinese interest, that I believe corrupted Joe Biden's ability to be president of the United States in a trustworthy manner. That was the story from the New York Post in October of 2020, soon before the election itself. Immediately, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of the big social media companies, many of the big media companies, Washington Post, New York Times, many of them, NPR, refused to cover or immediately discredited the New York Post story. One reason that they did that, we know because Mark Zuckerberg talked about this and others inside of Twitter have discussed it as well, is because the FBI had been briefing the social media companies in particular, maybe also the media companies, The FBI had been briefing them saying, beware of Russian disinformation being leaked to try to influence the 2020 election. So when this happened, a lot of people want to blame Twitter. They want to blame Facebook. When this story happened and there was an immediate attempt to censor it, the FBI was out there saying, hey, beware. In other words, the social media companies, and maybe the big media companies too, I haven't seen them answer questions about this, were doing their best to try to avoid allowing Russia or China or some foreign interest to influence our election. That's because of the FBI briefings. But, and this is so key, and if you want to focus on anything, if you're in Congress on a staff and you're watching this clip, if you are a Republican congressman, Republican senator, and you're watching this clip, if you're inside of the Trump administration, potential future administration, inside of the Trump campaign, this is so important. Someone in the FBI ordered the code red here because the FBI had been in possession of Hunter Biden's laptop since 2019. They had had this for nearly a year, and they had validated it through Apple. They knew that Hunter Biden's laptop was 100% real, yet they gave all of this talking points and all of these briefings to the big tech companies to try to make it seem like the Hunter Biden laptop might not be real. Someone inside of the FBI, maybe a group of people inside of the FBI for Joe Biden based on this laptop. There is ample evidence that the election would have swung in the other direction if this laptop had been accurately covered for the big story that it was relating to the Biden family being paid by Ukraine by Chinese interest. If that had occurred, there is evidence that supports Joe Biden would have lost the election. The FBI knew it was real, and yet they were briefing these big tech companies and these big media companies as if the laptop were not real. That allowed them to censor it, restrict many people's knowledge of its contents. It also opened the door for the 51 intelligence agents who came out and said that this laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. It allowed lies to be spread widely. 4 years later, the FBI introduces the laptop at trial, says it's 100% authentic, yet they spent 5 years. It took them 5 years to officially introduce it as evidence. They got it in 2019. That's a crime. Whoever inside of the FBI, whatever group of people knew the laptop was real and allowed briefings to be occurring saying that they didn't know or that it might be Russian disinformation intentionally for Joe Biden, they got away with it. It's a big, huge, seismic deal. Still hasn't been covered enough. We know that based on that laptop. This is a big story. I think it needs to be talked about. So those are my two big takeaways from the election itself. From the Hunter Biden case itself, dealing with how it impacted the 2020 election. This matters because if they were willing to do that in 2020, what are they going to be willing to do in 2024?